Imagine for a second that you're walking through a forest.
Okay.
But not a modern forest where you're, checking your step count or looking for a good spot to take a photo. Imagine you're walking through the woods maybe 2,000 years ago.
Right. A completely different mindset.
Exactly. In that world, the trees and the flowers aren't just scenery. They aren't just biology. They're a vocabulary.
That's actually a beautiful way to put it. It was a living language. To the people living back then, a plant wasn't just a thing that grew out of the dirt. It was, it could be a person who had been transformed, or a god in disguise, or a dragon sleeping in the soil.
And today, we are going to try and relearn that language. We're doing a deep dive into a fascinating and honestly kind of wild text from 1911.
Yeah, it really is wild.
It's by Charles M. Skinner, and it's titled Myths and Legends of Flowers, Trees, Fruits, and Plants.
Skinner is such an interesting guide for this because, he's writing right at the turn of the 20th century. Industrialization is fully swinging, and he's looking back at what he calls unschooled men. He's documenting how early humanity humanized the skies and the soil. They created a world where every single leaf and petal had a story or a spirit living inside it.
And the mission for this deep dive is to see the world through their eyes. So we're going to look at medical guessing games that literally determined life or death, plants that were rumored to eat people.
Literally eat people.
Yes, and the tragic love stories behind the flowers that you probably have in your garden right now.
It's a journey into the imagination of our ancestors. They didn't have microscopes, so they used metaphors. And those metaphors are surprisingly durable. They shape how we name things, how we tell stories, and even how we still think about nature today.
So let's just unpack this. I want to start with one of the most significant concepts in the book because it explains so much about how people survived or, didn't survive.
Right.
The doctrine of signatures. It sounds like a legal thriller, but it's actually medicine.
It was the prevailing medical theory for a very long time. The doctrine of signatures was essentially a system of reading nature like a manual. The belief was theological at its core.
Meaning God left clues.
Exactly. The idea is that God is benevolent. He wouldn't create a world full of terrible diseases without also creating the cures. And crucially, he wouldn't hide those cures from us.
Right, he wouldn't make you guess blindly.
Exactly. The creator would stamp a signature on every plant, a visual clue that told you exactly what disease it was meant to treat.
It's basically a high-stakes game of charades, like I spy with my little eye something that looks like a heart.
That's literally how it worked.
Yeah.
Take the wood sorrel, for instance. It has a very distinct heart-shaped leaf. Therefore, under this doctrine, the logic is undeniable. It must be a cordial, a heart restorative.
Because it looks like a heart, it heals the heart.
Precisely. But it gets way more specific than that. Skinner mentions the aspen tree. Now, anyone who has seen an aspen knows that the leaves are never still. They shimmer and quake even if there's barely a breeze.
Yeah, they're always fluttering.
So the medieval herbalist looks at that quaking leaf and thinks, what human ailment looks like this? The answer is shaking palsy, or what we might call Parkinson's today. Because the leaf shakes, it must be the cure for shaking.
Sympathetic magic, like cures like.
Exactly.
My absolute favorite example of this logic in the source material is the saxifrage. This is a tough little plant. It grows in the cracks of rocks high up in the mountains. It literally busts through solid stone to survive.
So apply the logic. If this plant can break a rock in the mountains, what can it break in the human body?
Kidney stones.
Exactly. Stones in the bladder. It's a poetic kind of logic, isn't it? It's assuming that the physical behavior of the plant in the wild will translate to its chemical behavior in your stomach.
It's a very literal way of thinking.
It is, but you have to admire the attempt to find order in the chaos. They weren't just guessing randomly, they were actively looking for signs. Pick turmeric. It's bright yellow. Jaundice turns the skin yellow. So naturally, turmeric was prescribed for jaundice because it matched the color of the patient.
Or the briny root. Apparently, the root often grows into a shape that looks like a swollen foot. So, boom, cure for dropsy or swelling in the legs.
It's a mix of rigorous observation and magical thinking. It wasn't science, but it was an attempt to read the manual that they believed God had left for them.
Yeah.
They truly believed the world was designed for them to understand.
And this obsession with plants didn't just stop at medicine. It actually shaped who we are, literally our names. This part of the deep dive blew my mind. I never connected vegetables to the Roman Empire before.
Oh, the Roman nomenclature. This is fascinating because we tend to think of Rome as this pristine marble city of emperors and legions. But at its heart, Rome was an agrarian society. Status was tied directly to land and what you grew on it.
Skinner points out that some of the most noble families were named after beans.
Yes, the Fabian family, one of the most powerful clans in Roman history. Their name comes from faba, the fava bean.
That feels less like a noble title and more like a playground insult. Here come the beans.
But you have to remember, the bean was sacred. The ballot system in Rome used beans. White for innocence, black for guilt. The bean was crucial to civic life. So being a Fabian, being of the bean family, was a massive flex.
And it wasn't just them either.
No. Cicero, the great orator, the man whose speeches we still study in law school.
Don't tell me.
Cicero, the chickpea.
So we're reading the brilliant legal speeches of Mr. Chickpea.
Essentially, yes. And the Pisans were the pea family. The Lenticcini were the lettuces. Shows that even in the high society of Rome, you couldn't escape the soil. Your identity was tied to what you cultivated.
That is fantastic. It really grounds them. Pun intended. But okay, let's pivot from the polite society of beans and peas to something a little darker. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source material has a whole section on plants of ill renown.
The monsters of the botanical world.
We have to talk about the Upas tree. The legend of this tree is straight out of a horror movie.
The Upas tree of Java. This was a massive legend in the 18th and 19th centuries. The story went that there was a tree in a valley in Java that was so poisonous, it stood alone in a literal zone of death. No other plant could grow near it.
And if a bird flew over it?
It would drop dead from the fumes. The ground underneath was just littered with skeletons of animals and people who strayed too close. It was basically a biological dead zone.
Now, Skinner points out the reality check here, because the tree actually does exist, doesn't it?
It does. Antiaris toxicaria. It's related to the mulberry and breadfruit. And yes, its juice is highly toxic. It is used for arrow poison in real life, but it doesn't create a circle of death. You can grow bamboo right next to it. Birds perch in it all the time.
So where did the zone of death story even come from?
Likely a mix of travelers' exaggeration and confusion with volcanic gas vents that do exist in Java. You combine a poisonous tree with a valley full of toxic gas, and suddenly you have a legend that lasts for centuries.
But then you have the story of the death flower, or El Benur. This is from a tale dating back to 1581. This is the stuff of actual nightmares.
This is the classic man-eating plant story. The legend describes a flower on a South Pacific island that was large enough for a man to actually step inside.
I can see exactly where this is going.
If a man entered, he was lulled to sleep by a strange hypnotic fragrance. Then the petals would slowly fold over him. The flower would distill acid and, well, he would be digested.
It's the ultimate trap. Beauty, fragrance, then acid.
It speaks to a deep human fear that nature isn't just passive, that it can be predatory. We eat plants, so we're terrified that one day a plant might eat us.
Speaking of predatory, there's a Mexican legend Skinner details about the alligator tail tree that is just bizarre.
The Rabo de Lagarto. It's a story about vanity, really. The legend says alligators used to be incredibly gullible. Men told them that on the other side of the mountains, alligators were worshipped as gods.
So the alligators packed their bags.
They did. They traveled all the way to the mountains expecting to be pampered. But the water gods were furious at the intrusion. They grabbed the alligators and thrust their heads deep into the earth.
Leaving their tails sticking up.
Exactly. The tails were left wagging in the air and they turned into trees. So when explorers hacked through the jungle and saw these spiky, strange trees, the Rabo de Lagarto, they were told they were looking at the tails of vain alligators who got what they deserved.
That is such a vivid image. And while we're on the topic of dangerous nature, we can't skip the fungi, toadstools, and fairy rings.
This is a great example of how biology gets mythologized. We know now that fairy rings, those perfect circles of mushrooms or dark grass, are caused by the way the fungus grows outward from a center, exhausting the nitrogen in the soil as it goes. It's just geometry.
But the folklore explanation is so much more fun.
Oh, much more fun. They were the worn paths where elves had been dancing all night, and the superstition was very specific. If an elf looks at you from a toadstool, you get a fever. It's a version of the evil eye. If a cow is looked at by an elf, she gives sour milk.
So the toadstool isn't just a mushroom, it's a perch for a mischievous spirit.
Precisely. You don't just kick it over. You show it respect or you face the consequences.
Okay, let's move from the dark and dangerous to the holy. The source material has a massive section on the sacred and the divine. It seems like trees played a huge role in Christian legends.
They did. The early Christians often adapted existing nature worship into their own stories. They didn't wipe out the meaning of trees, they just changed the script. Take the hawthorn, for example.
This is the bush associated with the crown of thorns, right?
Yes, the legend says the wreath of torture was fashioned from hawthorn or blackthorn. But there's a beautiful side story here about the robin redbreast.
I love this one.
The story goes that a little bird saw Christ suffering and tried to pull a thorn from his brow to relieve the pain. In the process, the sacred blood stained its feathers, and the robin has worn that red vest ever since.
It's a lovely explanation for a biological trait. Why is the robin red? Because it was compassionate. And then you have the Glastonbury thorn.
This is one of the most famous botanical legends in England. Joseph of Arimathea, who supposedly brought Christianity to Britain, stopped at Wearyall Hill. He stuck his staff into the ground to mark the spot.
And it didn't just stay a stick.
No, it took root. It grew into a hawthorn tree that miraculously blossoms every Christmas. It connects the natural cycle of the plant directly to the sacred calendar.
Skinner also mentions the aspen again in this context. We talked about it shaking for palsy, but there's a religious reason for the shaking, too.
That's right. This shows the incredible flexibility of these myths. One legend says the cross was made of aspen wood. Because of that terrible purpose, the tree shudders with shame to this day. Another version says Judas hanged himself on an aspen, and it trembles with horror.
It's interesting how the same physical trait, the shaking leaves, can mean cure for palsy in a medical context and eternal shame in a religious context.
That's the power of the symbol. You interpret the sign based entirely on the lens you're looking through.
What about the elder tree? I've heard that's bad luck.
The elder is fascinating because it bridges the gap between the pagan and the Christian. It's associated with Hulda, the mother of elves in Germanic myth. It's a tree with a spirit. You couldn't just chop it down to make furniture.
You had to ask permission.
Yes. You had to say, "Old woman, give me of thy wood, and I will give thee of mine when it grows in the forest." If you didn't, you invited terrible bad luck. And there's a grim detail about the dwarf elder. It's said to grow only where human blood has been shed.
Spooky. But let's end this section on a lighter note. The Christmas rose.
The hellebore. This is a really sweet story. A little shepherdess followed the Magi to the manger. But she was crying because she had no gift for the Christ child. She was completely empty-handed. An angel saw her weeping, waved a lily, and suddenly the ground was covered in white Christmas roses. She gathered them up, and the baby Jesus smiled. It explains why a delicate flower blooms in the dead of winter. It's a miracle born of tears and joy.
From the divine to the caffeinated, let's talk stimulants, because apparently even our morning coffee has a mythology.
It does. Coffee wasn't just discovered in a sterile lab. There are two great origin stories here.
Give us the first one. Haji Omar.
So Haji Omar was in exile. In 1285, he was driven out into the wilderness to starve. He was desperate. He found these strange coffee berries growing wild. He tried eating them, but they were way too bitter.
So he roasted them.
He tried roasting them, but then they were too hard to chew. So he finally boiled them, and the resulting liquid not only sustained him, it gave him such vitality that he survived. He was eventually made a saint for the discovery.
From exile to saint of espresso. Not bad, but I honestly like the goat story better.
The dancing goats. This is the classic. An Arab herder noticed his goats were acting very strange. They were cutting capers and dancing around after eating these specific berries. He tried them himself and felt the exact same buzz.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for coffee, was it?
No, not at all. Religious authorities in Constantinople were highly suspicious. They called coffee the coals of hell.
Why? Because it tasted burnt?
No, because it was too good. It kept people awake and talking, often keeping them away from the mosques. It was a major social disruptor. Stimulants always worry the establishment because they make people think and talk late into the night.
And then there's tea. The source mentions the chaking.
The holy scripture of tea. Tea mythology is very poetic, very internal. There's a beautiful description of the 7 cups that illustrates the progression of drinking it.
Walk us through the 7 cups, because this clearly isn't just about quenching thirst.
No, it starts physical. The first cup wets the throat. The second relieves loneliness.
I like that. Tea is a companion.
It gets deeper. By the 5th cup, you are purified. The 6th summons the gods. And the 7th wafts you right into their presence.
That is a lot more profound than my quick mug of Earl Grey in the morning.
It shows that for these cultures, consumption was communion. You weren't just drinking a beverage, you were actively altering your state of being.
Now, we can't have a deep dive into flowers without talking about romance. The section on love, tragedy, and transformation is pretty heartbreaking.
It is. In the ancient world, flowers were often the final form of tragic lovers. It's all about metamorphosis.
Take the almond tree.
The story of Phyllis and Demophoon. Phyllis was a princess who fell deeply in love with Demophoon. He left, promising to return, but he was delayed. She died of absolute grief waiting for him.
And the gods turned her into a tree.
Into a leafless almond tree. When Demophoon finally returned and embraced the trunk of the tree in remorse, it didn't put out leaves. It burst directly into bloom to show forgiveness and love. That's why the almond tree blooms before it leaves out. The myth explains the botany perfectly.
That is beautiful, but then you have the cabbage.
Yes. The cabbage is a little less romantic.
How does the cabbage fit into love and tragedy?
Well, it's more tragedy and punishment. The legend involves Lycurgus, a prince of Thrace. He passionately hated alcohol. He destroyed entire vineyards. He was actually bound to a vine as punishment for this destruction.
Bound to the very thing he hated.
Exactly. And his tears of frustration fell to the ground and took root, becoming cabbages.
So the cabbage is literally born of anti-alcohol tears.
Right. And because of this bitter feud between Lycurgus and the vine, the ancients believed cabbage was a cure for intoxication. If you ate cabbage, it would actively battle the wine in your system.
I'll have to remember that next time I'm at a party. What about the forget-me-not? That name feels like it has a story built right into it.
It does. A lover swims across the rushing Danube to get these tiny blue flowers for his sweetheart. But the current is too strong. He gets a cramp. He tosses the flowers to her on the bank and cries out, "Forget-me-not," right before he drowns.
It's the ultimate guilt trip flower.
There is a gentler version, though. It says Adam was naming the plants in Eden and simply overlooked this small one. The plant cried out, fearing it would be lost, and Adam named it Forget-me-not so he wouldn't fail again.
And the rose, the classic symbol of love.
The legend says roses were originally white. But when Venus, the goddess of love, ran to help her dying lover Adonis, she stepped on thorns. Her blood dyed the roses red.
So the red rose literally symbolizes the pain of love.
The blood and the sacrifice inherent in love.
And finally, the sunflower.
The story of Clytie. She loved Apollo, the sun god, but he completely ignored her. She sat on the ground for 9 days just staring at him as he moved across the sky. She took root and became the sunflower, which still turns its head every single day to follow the sun.
It's a symbol of unrequited devotion.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have to talk about the oddities before we wrap up. The X-Files section of the book, Skinner talks about fern seed.
This is pure magic logic. So ferns have spores, which are tiny, almost invisible to the naked eye. The ancients concluded that because the seed was invisible, it must possess the magical quality of invisibility.
So if I hold the invisible seed, I become invisible.
That's the thinking. But gathering it was incredibly dangerous. You had to collect it on St. John's night or Christmas, and the devil was watching the seed.
Of course he was.
If you spoke while gathering it, you might be torn to pieces. It was high risk, high reward. It was essentially the ultimate stealth technology of the Middle Ages.
And what about the Scythian lamb? This sounds like a creature, not a plant.
A bit of both. This was a legend of a fern in Tartary. Travelers saw these ferns with thick, woolly roots. The legend quickly grew that it was a plant-animal hybrid, a vegetable lamb that grew on a stalk.
Wait, a sheep growing on a stem?
Yes, it would graze on the grass around it. But once it had eaten all the grass within reach of its stem, it would die.
A tragic, tethered sheep.
It shows how blurry the line was between the kingdoms of nature. To the unschooled man, why shouldn't a plant be an animal? Why shouldn't a tree be a woman? The borders were entirely porous.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've looked at healing, poisoning, praying, and loving through plants.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these stories show a time when humanity felt deeply, intimately connected to nature. We didn't view trees and flowers as mere commodities or just landscaping. They were beings. They had souls, histories, emotions, and specific intents.
It's a relationship?
A relationship built on respect and sometimes deep fear. We've gained a lot of scientific knowledge since 1911, and certainly since ancient Rome. We know about photosynthesis and cellular structure. We know the eupistry isn't a magical death zone. But I wonder if we've lost the ability to see the personality of the world around us.
That brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. In our modern scientific age, we know exactly what plants are made of. We can dissect them down to their very DNA. But have we lost the ability to hear what they are saying?
When you look at your garden tomorrow, try to look with fresh eyes. Maybe that rose bush isn't just a plant. Maybe it's a memory of Venus. Maybe the aspen is trembling for a reason.
Look at your garden with suspicion or reverence, but don't look at it as just scenery.
Exactly.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.